Okay, let's try
That's
that.
working.
That's where it's working. Okay, Dennis, talk a little bit.
Yeah, we're sorry we didn't get the sound working till just now.
Dennis, say something.
So if you saw us moving our mouths and
Let
nothing
Dennis say
was
something.
coming.
Hello?
There you go.
Okay, I'm going
We
to
can
try
hear
to.
you too.
I'm going to try to restart I'm going to try to restart the program and do this bridges again. Let me redo
Oh, you're
this.
going to do the music again?
I'm going to see if that's working here, and we're going to go to. Oh, let me see. This is amazing how we're always changing this.
Well, recently Google changed their format on us
Well,
for the Hangouts.
Well, I did something different too.
And then, of course, when we changed our modus operandi.
Where is my?
First million miles.
There it is, right there.
Oh.
This is Bill Staines.
Yeah.
And it's the first million miles. And this is Bridges, and he gave us permission to use it on our show in part. So I'm going to try to play this again. We're going to start the program basically all over again.
So anyway, when we make a change, everything sort of changes a little. So.
Okay.
So we apologize for technical difficulties, but everybody's used to this.
Well, now it's not playing through here.
Oh, it's not playing through the music.
Right.
But there's.
So this is the problem we're running into.
Okay, so we won't be able to play the music today.
Okay, so we can't play the music, but that's, unfortunately, that's a problem. And we have to figure out why.
Well, we can't figure it out.
Oh, wait a second. That makes sense.
Languages and others.
That's better.
Okay, so now it's working.
I can see it.
Understanding, and they're better than anyone. They are languages and others. They are.
Okay, I think we have it now.
They're love and understanding, and they're better than anyone.
This is Bill Staines, Bridges, and welcome again. I'll start this over again. I'm going to welcome you to Bridges program in the night. Welcome to Bridges programming. That's sort of a shame because we had that.
Well, anyone who uses computers knows about technical frustration.
Okay, let's start over again. Welcome to Bridges programming. This is Wednesday on World Call-In. And we'd like to get as many people as possible. It's sponsored by the HREM, the Human Renewable Energy Measure. And next to me is Susan Comot, and on the phone is Dennis Carius.
Hello, Jeff. Hello, Susan.
Okay.
Hey, Dennis.
And we are talking about lots of things. Mainly, the mission statement for Bridges programming is to bring all humanitarian ideas together, for-profit or non-profit, but mainly to bring people together.
So they can start to understand each other's point of view.
Right. So anyway, we're doing that. Thank you, Bill, for letting us open with your program, with your Bridges song. We are going to talk today about a little bit more about the Pope, who's here right now in the United States, and he's saying that money makes us slaves to money, which I think is.
You have to be careful.
It's so difficult. I mean, we find ourselves involved with it too. We have to borrow money, so we have cash flow, and we have to sell stuff to get the cash flow paid off, the amount we borrow, and then we have to go on, and it goes on. Every human being is a slave to money. And I was telling Dennis earlier, before the show started, or the program started, I was talking to him about, suppose you had a shovel, gesundheit, a shovel rather, that you had to dig a hole, and you were slaves to that shovel to make sure you're spending more time working with the shovel than the shovel is doing. Well, that's what's happening with our money system. And the Pope brought that up very, very carefully. So anyway, so this is Bridges Programming. You can please look at the websites. It's also Renew the Earth, and that's a nonprofit organization that you can always send money to if you think it's worthwhile. It's to talk about good projects around the world. And we have a newsletter, and there's a book that you can see. It's on our screen now. That's a free download for your child, and it's called Illyria's World, and that talks about climate change with a robot. And the robot's actually a real built robot, 7 foot tall, and the little girl goes through the robot, with the robot in an imaginary world, and talks about climate change. And that's a free download. And you're going to be live, physically live in Albany, New York, in Stuyvesant Plaza, a week from Friday, a week from this coming Friday, which is the 2nd of October. If you would like to come join us in the studio of that bookstore, which is called the Book House. And we're not selling any books, which is rare to have. We're going to try it out as an experiment, and we're going to be doing that there. Now, anyway, that's where we are now, and I think we got this thing working properly. So I'm going to let Susan go from here and take it from here. And Dennis, do you have anything? You wanted to talk about something yesterday. You sent us an email about something. Do you want to discuss that a little bit?
Well, yes, that's why I sent it to both of you, so that after reading it, we could talk about our president and some of the good work that he's doing. A lot of people had hope for Barack Obama when he was elected. And here's an example where no president has ever done this when the United Nations says we cannot do this, and then our country could object to that. Well, here was an example where President Obama is going with the UN, and now the Senate and the House, which are both Republican, might oppose that. So it's interesting.
Well, the thing is, what is the president going? What is the president saying he wants to do with the United Nations?
Well, from what I read,
What is it? What is the president going along with the United Nations for?
Well, because the United Nations really wants to help not just this country. The United Nations does want to help this world, and it might be a good way to really, reform things on this planet if we can get the United Nations to do what it's trying to do, instead of having countries like us and 4 other countries in the world who can say no, they can object. It's kind of sad because there's 4 countries.
So what exactly did our president do that's so different?
Well, I'm just saying that in the past, our president would always say, "I object," and because we are one of those 5 countries, we can object, and the UN cannot go any further. But here was an example where the UN said that we should deal with Cuba like all other countries in the world, and this is one time where our president is saying, I agree with you, or I abstain, whatever you want to call it.
No, he abstained, meaning he didn't vote, right?
right, and in that way,
Right.
he's tacitly agreeing with the UN stance
But he's not voting
against what our Congress in general
but
is
he's not
saying.
voting for. He's not voting with them as a president. He's abstaining.
Right, and by abstaining, he is indicating that he agrees with what the UN is saying.
Yeah, but he's not voting with them.
But he's not voting with them.
So he's not taking a
He's
stance.
not aggressive about it.
It's
no.
like if I agree with that we shouldn't kill anybody, and they say, well, you give me a finger up or down to kill that person,
Don't put it.
and I say I'm not putting my hand up.
Right.
Well, that's being, it's wishy-washy. Let's take a stand and say no. We have to agree with the UN.
But that's characteristic of President Obama.
Right.
At this point,
He's not
anyway.
taking a stand. He's
But
abstaining.
by abstaining, it's also very. It excites all kinds of conversation in Congress, because he should have, according to them, said, no, you can't make policy for the United States. That hasn't been
he didn't make
decided.
policy.
UN cannot make policy for the United States, is what he should say. That has not been decided yet. We're going to vote against that.
Right.
But he's abstaining, so he's putting more pressure on Congress to think harder and maybe change their minds about our economic relations with Cuba. Right now we have diplomatic relations, which came about because of Pope Francis, urging this to happen.
Well, I have a personal feeling about Barack Obama, and I must say to you that I believed in Barack Obama when the first time he ran for office, and the second time I thought maybe as a lame duck president he will actually put his neck on the chopping block, and he did not do that. Again, he did not do that.
Well, I think he's very cautious.
No, I'm trying to give my opinion.
Oh, I'm just agreeing with you. He's a very cautious
But I
president.
think what happened was, and this is a conspiracy theory, I don't know this for a fact, but I think someone got to President Obama and said to him, if you don't make sure this our economy functions for the very wealthy, your family and you are in jeopardy, and don't think it can't happen. And I think that happened to him just prior to the second time he was elected, when he almost threw this thing to Romney. And I think he realizes that he doesn't have the power that you would think a president has. And I think he's just as vulnerable as a human being, and his family is as vulnerable as a human being as anybody. And the very wealthy people in this world can get to pretty much anybody they choose. Now, this is a conspiracy theory. I'm not telling you I'm right or wrong. This is just a possibility, because I cannot believe the words this guy used to become president and the change we expected from him. It's almost 180 degrees of what he did when he got into office, both times. Now, recently, what I hear Dennis saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis, is it looks to you is it the first time that he's actually making a very slight change in our normal policy. Is that what I hear you saying with that email?
Yes, this is the time where we are going with the United Nations instead of saying what the United States wants is more important.
But he didn't go with them. He went with an abstention. Abstention means I'm not voting either way. And with an abstention, it's just taking someone out of the vote. It's like if you and I decide to vote for Democrat or Republican or independent, and if you tell me I vote for an independent, which would push through, take the vote away from the side you think should get in, he's doing the exact same thing that I would do if I voted for, let's say, an independent party or a Green Party. Because I'm abstention. I'm not voting one way or the other. I'm not voting, period. So therefore, if the vote is not, doesn't matter. But if he would vote with the to allow what they call a communist country to be part of the United Nations again, then that would have been a positive thing. But he abstained. So did Cuba actually get into because of that, or are they still out?
Well, that's really interesting, because there's a communist country called Russia. That's one of those 5 countries. The UN has those 5 countries that that can.
Yeah, but is Cuba part of it now? Are they in?
I believe yes.
Okay, so because of the abstention, Cuba is now into the United Nations?
I don't know all the details, and Susan, I'm not sure if you read.
I read the piece that you sent,
right.
and the impression was that the thing that was very controversial was our president his abstention, but it's not, as Jeff is saying, an assertion of, yes, we agree with the United Nations, or I agree as president with the United Nations, or I disagree. He just abstained. And so,
right.
That leaves him both options still. But normally a president would say to the UN, if something hasn't been determined yet by our Congress, that he would say, the UN is incorrect in this. We have not made that determination yet with our government, and we cannot be dictated to by the United Nations, essentially.
Right.
They would have some kind of pleasant reply like that, not the way I worded it, but,
Well, that's interesting. Let me ask Susan, have you and Jeff ever been to Cuba?
Yes, of course.
Right. That's interesting, because you've both been to Cuba. Do you think they should be treated by us any differently than we treat other nations?
Well, the problem with that, from what I gather, first of all, my impression of Cuba is that they are better educated than we are by far.
They're 99% literacy in Cuba.
They have better health care.
We have maybe a little more than 60%.
They have better health care than we do. They don't have the medications because of us, because we have embargoes against them, but they're better educated.
What was emphasized initially, I mean, there's no freedom of speech, political freedom. Yes, that's a big problem. But the emphasis when it all began was that everybody, because there was so much poverty in Cuba before the revolution and people were suffering. So when the revolution occurred and the dictators arose, Castro, etc., their premise was to have food, shelter, and education for everyone.
And they do.
Cuba. And they have continued to do that.
But
it's not, the kind of luxurious living that, people imagine is...
because of our embargoes.
Well, all the rest of the world trades and vacations in Cuba. We're the only country that does not.
Right, but
that's an important thing to realize.
But
you go to Cuba, there are French, German, everyone in Europe who wants to. They go there. They go to Havana. They go to the beautiful hotels and they vacation there.
But they can't.
But they're so far away that they don't really have a lot of economic.
Because we have embargoes against them.
Not against the countries. The other countries make their own decisions.
But they have to trade for you in this world. They have to trade for U.S. dollars.
Yes, I was getting to that.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. You can.
No, you have to get to U.S. dollars, and that's why they have the sanctions hold true, and it hurts the Cuban people.
Right, because we have a world economic system that is based on the dollar at this point. This could change, but and of course the euro is always trying to assert itself, and the Chinese are trying to assert their particular form of currency or economics. But this right now, the dollar is king. You go to Cuba and they want to know if there's anything they can do to get dollars from you as a
They don't want the embargo against them.
And so, but now they have a diplomatic opening, but still the economic opening is not.
Now, why the economic opening is there now?
Not there.
Well, it's not there now, but the reason why this country would like to reestablish negotiations is because we found oil off their coast, large quantities of oil off the coast of Cuba. And they have in Cuba lots of cobalt like they have in Africa. Now, these are major trade things so all of a sudden we're saying, let's make nice to Cuba. And because they have natural resources that we want. Now, the problem with the whole thing is we have a worldwide economic system where the United States is the king because we have to trade for U.S. dollars for oil. And that's what happened the first Bush administration. And he sent Kissinger over there, and they made this great deal, and was ingenious, by the way. We got to give him credit for that, to keep the world currency based on U.S. dollars. And the only thing that holds in that, and so it fluctuates, the currencies fluctuate because there's no baseline, a start point. If I ask somebody, anybody, to look on a map and put their finger on a map and say, go there. And they say, okay, I know where I want to go, but I don't know where I am. Without knowing where you are, you can't go there. And that's the way our worldwide economic system is. We all want to help everybody. We want to make sure that the economic system is viable and not dysfunctional. But it's a totally dysfunctional economic system because most people don't know where we are. 99% of the world population is in poverty because they don't know where we are in the economic world. The 1%, however, knows exactly where they are, and they can control the world economics because they know the point of start from where they are. They know how to control it. They know how to control the stock markets. They know how to control the commodity markets. They know how to control the markets of the game. It's a game like Monopoly or musical chairs, and they are controlling the game. And go ahead.
Yeah, and well, back to the economic warnings that the Pope, when he was just recently in Cuba, he was trying to warn the people that, okay, this dictatorship with an individual, and the type of communism that Cuba is practicing, that is, influencing the lives of Cubans as far as how they can speak out, how they can change their social commitment to each other, etc. He's warning them, the Pope, that look, you have something very unique here. It's a microcosm of something very very unique, because everybody, as I said, there's 99% literacy. You can become a doctor if you have the intelligence to do so for free. People are not starving. They are providing, they don't have luxuries, but they are living a real life without the stresses of knowing they'll have no place to live, or nothing to eat, or no education in order to change their circumstances. The education is there. They can't, because of the government, leave their countries easily. They have to escape the country to give up their citizenship and end up somewhere else in order to realize some ambitions that some people may have. But the Pope is saying to them, be careful, because this is another type of dictatorship. This economics is another type of dictatorship that you really don't understand yet. I mean, you understand the one you've been growing up in, and it's an individual, with power over the country.
But he's giving.
But the economic dictatorship is much more difficult to pinpoint. And once you start getting involved with the money, with business, and with the businesses that that will come into Cuba from the United States, they know the playbook backwards and forwards, and
they dictate. They
will then dictate
stronger than any dictator you have.
Right.
The economic dictator is out there to dictate that you will be a slave forever, and you will be a slave to the top of the world's wealthiest people in the planet.
He clearly saw something in his interaction with the people in Cuba, and you will see that if you visit there before all the commercial stuff does finally enter. If you're able to visit Cuba, as we did 10 years ago, with a group of religious individuals and professors, and we were supposed to interact and do a little bit of he tried to communicate so the more understanding would occur. But anyway, if you visit, you realize there's a certain potential there, because they've been isolated from the economics. Yes, they're under a dictatorship, but they're isolated from an even more aggressive dictatorship, which is the one that we're all dealing with all the time, the economic dictatorship. And they have, as I said, the basic needs met, and they've been able to cultivate a certain aspect of freedom of thought that you do not, you do not often encounter anymore in anywhere. And I'm sure the Pope responded to this, because there's a different quality to the people there. And I'm sure if you understood the Spanish language very, very well, you pick up on it even more. And I know, of course, the Pope is South American, so he is able to tune in completely to what the people are like. And he's saying, look, there is a danger here. You must be careful that money can make you its slave, and it's worse than being a slave under a dictatorship. And it's much more insidious. It's much more difficult to pinpoint, and much more difficult to understand what's happening. And so he's trying to let them know that they have something special, and to try to and give them a chance to try to figure it out. and bring that with them, you know, so that they can maybe have a different reaction to capitalism and economics as usual than the rest of the world. But, you know, good luck with that. I mean, I really do wish them good luck. These are very intelligent population.
And
They've had a unique.
They're not more. I want to get.
I'm not saying they're more
No,
intelligent. They're just as intelligent as everyone else.
We all have the same
Equally
basic
intelligent.
minds. Some people have a mind to go become doctors and they understand the technical aspects better. Some people understand how to dig a trench bigger, but you still need every human being, and every human being has some value. However, what they have in Cuba that we do not have here is the ability to enjoy their life more.
Yeah.
And that gives them more.
Opens.
It gives them more free time. So look, the average person,
That's right.
the average
It's one
person,
of the main things.
the average person in this country who does not have a job and it is on, we'll call it on the dole, as the English people call it, or the Irish people call it. You're not working, so you're on the dole. Well, in Cuba, there's no jobs. It's a poor nation. So basically, the whole nation works a little bit. They work with what they can, and they're on the dole. So they have free time. So what you see in the squares is a tremendous amount of people playing dominoes, and they're discussing politics, not against government, because if they open their yap against government, they will be thrown in jail. That's the problem with that dictatorship. But that dictatorship is doing something very good for their population. They're giving them their education, food, and shelter for a minimal amount of time.
Out of their lives. So then they have time,
the free time
to cultivate who they are within the context, of course, of these different
and if they're not hung up on money, they're very happy in Cuba. As a matter of fact, we know people who live in Costa Rica, and they came here to make money, and they can't wait to get back to Costa Rica when they retire. The bottom line is they need the money to live a better quality of life that they think they need, because they are brainwashed by us. I just spoke to someone earlier, yesterday, I think it was, we were discussing, he was visiting us in Florida, and we went to a Cuban restaurant, and he didn't like the food there, and he said, that's a terrible place to eat. And we love it. I prefer that to a fancy restaurant. As a matter of fact, Susan's birthday was that day, and she said, I prefer eating at the Cuban place than over at this fancy restaurant. And this guy's a cheap guy, but he walked into the place and there were all people speaking different languages, and he was very nervous about where he was sitting. But then I said to him, it's not a question. I said, go to any place in your neighborhood, because you're more affluent than others, or you think you are more affluent than others. And you will find if you go to the poor neighborhoods in your community, they have a different way of even communicating. They have a different way of trading. They have a different barter system than you have, because you have money and they don't. So, and if you go to the homeless section where people are living, out of a box, they have another means of bartering back and forth. I mean, it may not be the way you think is good or bad, but that's subjective. We need to get something that is functional. And to answer your question, Dennis, what we found in Cuba is human beings not having a lot of money, but having a reasonably good, or better, in my opinion, quality of life than we have here. It's just very different. And the bad part about Cuba is the government has an iron fist, because they don't want the economy to be controlled by the Western world.
But the thing is that they have a lot of more free time to cultivate a different aspect of being human than most people are allowed to do, who are deeply into the economic system. That we can't even imagine how deeply we're in it, because we're born into it. But you can start to withdraw your mind from it if you concentrate and you kind of think, are there other ways that I could be using my short life? Are there other things I would rather do than work most of the time for money, so that I can have enough money when I'm old and can't work anymore to have some kind of dignity till I die. Now this is the equation that we're working on for the most part. In Cuba, it's a different kind of emphasis. That is not the equation they're working on. They are, there's sufficient work going on amongst the population that covers food, shelter, and education for everyone. And then there is a significant amount of free time that they use in all their individual ways.
They can learn, they can play music, they can.
There's a highly evolved musical arts coming out of Cuba, writing,
Soccer.
Well, yeah, of course, sports and things like that.
And they have no money, so this is interesting that they're doing this thing without money. And see, money is an irrelevant thing. Like Dennis, you and I were talking earlier. You said, "What would we do without money? How would I eat? Would I starve to death?" Did you ask me that question earlier today? I'm not on the show. Well, the fact of the matter, do you think you would really starve, or the world would starve if we pulled the money totally? Suppose we pulled the money totally out of the world. There was no more money, right?
Right.
Imagine that. What's that guy? John Lennon says, imagine there's no more money, no more God, no more. Do you actually believe you would starve, that the whole world would stop if money was taken out of the equation?
I could just go outside and follow a rabbit and just eat whatever they're eating.
Or you can eat the rabbit.
Well, I wouldn't do that. A rabbit is actually, a rabbit is the last thing I would eat on this planet because they are vegetarians.
Well,
Rabbits,
no,
but
if you were really hungry, Dennis, you would eat the rabbit. A matter of fact, if you were really hungry, you'd get a rat and eat the rat.
Oh, I see.
A matter of fact, there's a whole movie about that called something about a wolf. Never Cry Wolf or something.
Oh, you mean, yeah, that was interesting. He was studying the wolves.
He was studying the wolves, and he was starving, and it was the middle of the winter, and he was starving. He noticed the wolves would get mice. So what he did is he had no choice. He was starving, and the wolves were going to get him. So he was peeing outside. He was trying to keep the wolves away.
Oh, that's not true. Now you're misrepresenting the story.
Anyway,
there was no threat to him from the wolves, but he was observing that this incredible predator, what it was surviving on were mice. And they had a very, very interesting way of hunting them. And if you read I'm sorry, Mowat, M-O-W-A-T is his last name, the Canadian author, Mowat. And he was studying as a research scientist the behavior of wolves because Canada was trying to figure out ways to get rid of the wolves in an area where they wanted to do some economic, gain. Right. And so they were trying to make a case that wolves are really, really dangerous and need to be eradicated and blah, blah, blah. So they send out their state researchers, and he was one of them. And he had a territory that he was studying and a family of wolves that he was studying, and he discovered that they are not in any way a threat to humans, and that they're an incredible creature in the way that it adapts its family and adapts to other groups of wolves, and they just follow the herds and take the weakest of the animals, and so they're a benefit to the herds of, they were worried also about human hunters. They were worried, oh, the wolves are going to get all of our caribou, and we want to hunt the caribou, and blah, blah, blah. That was another issue. But he found that all through the winter, most these wolves were surviving on hunting mice. And then, eventually the herds of caribou would come through and they get a big feast now and then, and they'd fill up on that. But they had these really charming ways of stalking and hunting mice. And it was like he was watching them gulping something down, he had to observe them through binoculars. And what the heck are they hunting and catching? And then he realized it was mice.
So anyway, he was starving too.
No, he was okay. They gave him rations.
But now he was running out of rations.
He wanted to find out
He was running out of rations.
He started cooking the mice as an experiment on himself to see, if it was, a sustaining diet for
Right.
him. And so, this is another part of the research.
But but anyway,
Right.
he wound up eating mice. And
Yes, he did.
And I'm saying to Dennis that if you got rid of all the money and you didn't have money, you would find a way of eating in your community.
Right.
As long as nobody's shooting at you and you have free time, you would ask your neighbor, how are you surviving? And the neighbor would say, well, I'm growing vegetables. And another one might say, well, I'm growing vegetables, but the rabbits were eating them, so I'm now shooting the rabbits and eating the rabbits because rabbits are vegetarian and they're eating my vegetables. So then we'd say, well, I got to get the rabbits to stop eating my vegetables. So you would shoot the rabbits, and then if the hawk was eating the rabbits or the bird, the turkeys were running around eating your vegetables, you may shoot the turkeys and eat the turkeys because that's where we have a point of food. But you wouldn't kill more turkeys than you would need out of principle, because you don't need more unless you have a friend of yours who said, listen, I'm a lousy shot, would you kill some rabbits for me so I can have my rabbits? And then he would say, if you do that, I'll help you fix your plumbing. So we would work this out where we work in cooperation with each other. You may choose to be a vegetarian. So supposing you grow a vegetable garden, Dennis, like suppose we do that, right? Now you have no money, so you went out in the backyard and you grew a vegetable garden, right?
Right.
Now the rabbits are eating your vegetables, right?
Okay.
So your neighbor says, I'll shoot the rabbits so you can have your vegetable garden, and I'll eat your rabbits. Would that be okay with you?
Well, I wouldn't let the rabbits go up over the fence and do that.
Well, supposing they are.
Well, Dennis would discuss it with them.
I mean, can a dog climb a fence?
Yeah, so you want to shoot the dog?
No, a dog cannot climb a fence, right?
Look, they can jump over the fence depending on how high it is.
Well, that's what I mean. I would just protect my garden so these animals would not do that. Because if you had a cat or a dog, you would not kill your cat or your dog just to eat it, would you?
Well, if I was starving, I probably would.
Oh, well, yeah, that's my question. Is I think we could have a better, world where we would not have to do that.
Well, aren't we killing? No, let me go this way then. Aren't we killing people so we have food and shelter in abundance? Aren't we killing human beings?
Yes, very much.
So wouldn't it be better to kill the rabbit rather than kill another human being?
I agree.
Let's get back to
Okay,
our subject today, which was what Pope Francis is saying about economics.
Let's do that.
And we have a little bit of time left. And I'll just credit it. The full name is Farley Mowat, and the book is Never Cry Wolf.
Oh.
And his conclusion was that the wolves were definitely a benefit to the areas where they lived. But of course, the government didn't want to hear that.
Never cry wolf.
And they did not act on his
Farley Mowat, Never
discovery,
Cry Wolf.
yeah. But he's written lots of wonderful books about animals, about his experiences. But I want to just read something in Pope Francis's encyclical, where he introduces, and I say in the summary that he tells us right at the beginning, where he summarizes sort of where he wants to go in the body of the encyclical, that he's going to come back to certain subjects over and over again, and one of them is economics. And here's where he talks about that. Although, quote, each chapter will have its own subject and specific approach, it will also take up and re-examine important questions previously dealt with. This is particularly the case with a number of themes which will reappear as the encyclical unfolds. As examples, I will point to the intimate relation between the poor and the fragility of the planet, the conviction that everything in the world is connected, the critique of new paradigms and forms of power derived from technology, the call to seek other ways of understanding the economy and progress. Okay? These are things, and I'm not going to go on because you can read this yourself, but these are things he wants to revisit over and over again. And we read last program on Sunday, his assertion where he says, a quote, "The human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together." And this is an extremely important thing to understand. I marked this a comment because Dennis likes to talk about the concept of greed, and I think that this comment from Pope Francis speaks to that. Quote, "Some countries are gradually making significant progress developing more effective controls and working to combat corruption. People may well have a growing ecological sensitivity, but it has not succeeded in changing their harmful habits of consumption, which, rather than decreasing, appear to be growing all the more. A simple example is the increasing use and power of air conditioning." And it's interesting that he brought that up because 13 years ago we visited Italy, and it was having a heat wave that it had never experienced in 100 years. It was, I think, spring.
Right.
And it was like, whoa, they have no air conditioning. They don't even use fans because they think it gives you a neck ache.
Right.
So they just have these large windows they open up and no screens, and a nice curtain will float around and the breeze will come through. And they were in no way able to cope with this incredible heat.
Right.
And so I guess since then, there's been a lot of people buying air conditioners. I mean, he's remarking on that.
On how much energy it takes to run air
uses,
conditioning.
right. And quote, then it goes on to say, "The markets, which immediately benefit from sales, stimulate even greater demand. An outsider looking at our world would be amazed at such behavior, which at times appears self-destructive."
Right.
So he's talking about harmful habits of consumption, and we know there are quite a few other ones that he just uses air conditioning as an example. I mean, I don't think anybody would be.
But how did he address greed in that for Dennis's?
Harmful. Oh, I'm sorry, I just took it out because it's a destructive. These are destructive tendencies on the part of people.
In other words, he's saying, from what I gather, yeah. I think I can help that.
Yeah, help me,
what you are saying is,
I just went on to another thing.
What the Pope is saying is that the use of air conditioning to make our lives comfortable, instead of using something that we can live with without air conditioning, to make ourselves more comfortable, we buy air conditioning, which increases the market, and that takes more energy.
And then, of course, the market, realizing that this is a money maker, will then emphasize it over, and this is a kind of
and then they can sell more air conditioning.
Right, exactly.
So the problem is the ambition of the person to make money, not the greed factor, but the economic system is creating the ability for someone who's smart enough to figure out a way to make more air conditioners cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and use more and more and more energy to make human beings more comfortable. And then we say, well, boy, I want to go to an air conditioned mall. Now, I know for a fact that when we live in Florida, we do not have central air conditioning. We do have one little air conditioner in the bedroom, so it's comfortable for sleeping. But we don't even turn that on most of the time. So, but when it's really hot, we either go into the mall or we go into a shopping center and we try to cool down, because heat is a very uncomfortable thing. But if it was set up where we're using nature's energy rather than fossil energy, we wouldn't be hurting the planet. And that's the point Dennis is trying to make, that we're greedy, but we could be just as, if there was no money involved to make money or to be ambitious, we can be ambitious. If the money wasn't there, we can use solar or renewable energy not to hurt the planet. I don't think the Pope would be objectionable. It wouldn't be an objectionable thing to this, because he's not saying he shouldn't be ambitious. He's saying you shouldn't hurt the planet
I can speak to that with
Okay, go ahead.
with a quote here, and we have enough time for me to read it. It'll only take a few minutes. The common destination of goods, and this is 93, paragraph 93, section 6. Quote, whether believers or not, we are agreed today that the earth is essentially a shared inheritance whose fruits are meant to benefit everyone. For believers, this becomes a question of fidelity to the Creator, since God created the world for everyone. Hence, every ecological approach needs to incorporate a social perspective which takes into account the fundamental rights of the poor and the underprivileged, the principle of the subordination of private property to the universal destination of goods, and thus the right of everyone to their use, is a golden rule of social conduct and, quote, the first principle of the whole ethical and social order. The Christian tradition has never recognized the right to private property as absolute or inviolable, and has stressed the social purpose of all forms of private property. St. Paul II forcibly reaffirmed this teaching, stating that, quote, God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members, without excluding or favoring anyone, unquote. These are strong words. He noted that, quote, a type of development which did not respect and promote human rights, personal and social, economic and political, including the rights of nations and of peoples, would not be really worthy of man, unquote. He clearly explained that, quote, the church does not indeed defend the legitimate right to private property, but she also teaches no less clearly that there's always a social mortgage on all private property in order that goods may serve the general purpose that God gave them, unquote. Consequently, he maintained it is not in accord with God's plan that this gift be used in such a way that its benefits favor only a few. This calls into serious question the unjust habits of a part of humanity.
Well, that's pretty strong. And by the way, people who think they own something, like Dennis, do you feel as though we own our own homes? If we have the mortgage paid off, do you think we own our home?
I feel that way, yes.
Well, isn't it the fact that you can't take them home with you when you die?
Well, I mean, you can't even take your body with you, can you?
Well, it doesn't matter. You can't take anything with you when you die. So you really don't own anything, including your body. So we are custodians of what is physical in this world. And what's physical in this world is how we have to measure things. We are custodians of it. Like we own property, we're just custodians of the property. When we die, the next person will be the custodian of the property. Now they may choose to dump old oil on it or have a junkyard on it. And you need junkyards, by the way. But if you destroy the property, you're a lousy custodian. And if you're a good junkyard dealer and you need a place for junk, and you keep it and maintain it in a manner that's beneficial to the society and around you and the planet around you, then you are a good custodian of the planet. So we are nothing more than custodians of our planet. And we don't really own anything. It's part of the way our human nature is, or the world nature is. The nature or God is, in my opinion, a benevolent dictator. And if you go outside right now, and I told you to walk in front of a bus, you would not do that because your mind knows that you were taught if you walk in front of that bus, you will die. If you walk in front of somebody with a gun and they shoot you, you will most probably get hurt or die. So we've learned that our mind, if we eat wrong foods, we will die. If we eat poison or poison water, we will be sick and probably die. These are things that we know. I mean, we've learned them. So nature says, I'm giving you a mind. If you poison your atmosphere, your planet, you will have a thing called, let's call it climate change, and therefore you will most probably die. This is what we've learned. We have a mind to do this. If you poison your water, you won't have clean enough water. You will probably get sick and die. If you poison your land with GMOs and chemicals, you will most probably get sick and die. These are things nature is, or God, if you want to be religious about it, has taught us. We learned this. So I consider, because nature or God has given us a mind to try to think it through, and we're doing things that are not beneficial toward the planet and our species. And we will most probably wipe out our species and die if we don't use our mind that we have from our benevolent dictator. So I'm saying to you that we need to expand our mind. We're nowhere near as smart as where we plan, where we think we are. And I can tell you that I believe, now this again, it's my belief system. I believe that we can never get to perfection as a species or even as an evolutionary process. We can get to an excellent point. Like, I think nature is excellent. The reason why I don't think she's perfect is because we're still killing one another. I don't think God's perfect, but it's close. Now, if we want to look at our species, if we want to measure our species, we can get to excellent. Now, this is not I stole this from Dr. David Borton too. Dr. Borton has a very nice way of putting things. He's one of the helpers with the HREM idea, the Human Renewable Energy Measure. We can't get to perfection, but we can get to excellent. And I think the species in our intellect, on a scale from 1 to 10 for being excellent, is probably a 3 or a 4. We haven't anywhere gotten near the 5 yet. Until we stop killing one another and stop poisoning our planet and our water and our soil and our air, we are really doing a bad job. And we need the HREM, the Human Renewable Energy Measure, to see where we are so we know how to get to where we want to go. And I want to give you a little experiment to try out. Find a map somewhere and put your finger on the map. But you don't know where you are on another map. So I'm going to ask you how you would get to that point. And you're going to find you can't get to the point without knowing where you are. And as a large portion of the planet, let's say, for argument's sake, 90% of the world population has no idea where they are economically. So they can't get to where they want to be. A small percentage, maybe 1 to 10%, does know how to control the economy, and they know exactly where they are in the economy. And they're controlling the economy. So it appears that we have a dysfunctional government. But the reality of it is we have a dysfunctional economic system. Does that make sense to you, Dennis?
Well, yes, it does, Jeff.
Could I make a comment?
Please.
We only have a few more minutes. It may be from what you're saying about where you are. It may be, and I'm just occurred to me while you were saying that what Pope Francis was sensing in Cuba was that the Cuban people, because of their circumstance and their actual kind of being shielded from the capitalist economic system and from the way that you can't even call it capitalist anymore. It's like sort of a fiat currency system that, anyway, I'm not going to go into that, but they've been shielded from it, and maybe they have a better sense or a different sense of where they are than most people have been able to develop over their lives. And they have been able to develop a different sense of where they are. I mean, they're not only on the island of Cuba, but emotionally and as humans, where they are in relation to their village where they lived. And we visited a couple of these small villages, their relationship with each other, it's just very a unique opportunity possibly that this population has. And he was saying things to them while he was there, and this is not an exact quote, but it was like, live a life of service to others and not to ideology. He's warning about ideology. He's saying realities are greater than ideas. Though I think what he means by ideas is is illusions that you will be invited and propelled into once the propaganda of how you should be living, how much money you should make, what kind of car you should own. These kind of things start forcing themselves in. And I will read here from Pope Francis, let him have the last word. Quote, "The rich and the poor have equal dignity, for, quote, the Lord is the maker of them all. He himself made both small and great, and he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. This has practical consequences, such as those pointed out by the bishops of Paraguay. Quote, every campesino has a natural right to possess a reasonable allotment of land where he can establish his home, work for subsistence of his family, and a secure life. This right must be guaranteed so that its exercise is not illusory, but real. That means that apart from the ownership of property, rural people must have access to the means of technical education, credit, insurance, and markets."
Very good. And that's what Mises says too, an Austrian economist. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Bridges Programming, sponsored by the HRM and Renew the Earth. And we are going to be going out with the energy song that was built for us by Yelly and Folkman. Thank you guys for listening.
Oil companies, renewables can fuel the world. We're here to spread the news of energy, energy. It all comes down to energy. You wonder where the money's gone. Well, here's some fuel for thought. It all comes down to energy.